Why do Americans call football soccer? The term soccer often baffles non-Americans, leading many to wonder why the United States uses this name for a sport that most of the world refers to as football. To understand why Americans call football soccer, we need to explore the history of the sport, the evolution of its name, and how different forms of football developed in the US and Europe. The origins of football. The game that most of the world knows as football originated in Britain. By the mid-19th century, various forms of football were being played in schools and universities across England. However, there wasn't a standardized set of rules for the sport. Two primary forms of football emerged: rugby football, which allowed handling of the ball, and association football, which primarily prohibited it. In 1863, the Football Association (FA) was founded in England to create a uniform set of rules for association football, distinguishing it from rugby. This form of the game became what is now known internationally as football or soccer in the US, the birth of soccer. Interestingly, the word soccer originated in England, not the United States. It was a slang term derived from association football. To differentiate between rugby football, commonly shortened to rugger, and association football, players and fans began calling the latter ASOC football. The abbreviation ASOS eventually morphed into soccer, with the addition of the "er" suffix being a common practice in British slang at the time. For several decades, both soccer and football were used interchangeably in the United Kingdom. The term soccer was widely accepted in England throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and it even appeared in some official literature. How soccer spread to America. When association football arrived in the United States in the late 19th century, it was introduced as soccer, the same term the British were using. However, by this time, a different version of football, which would evolve into what is now known as American football, was already gaining popularity in the U.S. American football was a combination of rugby and association football, but developed its own unique set of rules. As American football became more entrenched in U.S. culture, football became associated with this distinctly American sport, and the British term soccer was used to distinguish association football from the more popular gridiron game. Why Americans still use soccer? Over time, the term soccer became the standard way to refer to association football in the United States, while football came to mean American football. This distinction is deeply rooted in U.S. sports culture, where American football is the dominant sport. By the mid-20th century, association football had gained immense popularity in Europe and around the world, and the term football became the global standard. Meanwhile, in England, the use of soccer started to decline, and football became the more accepted term for the sport. In the U.S., however, the term soccer remained due to the strong cultural presence of American football. Today, even as soccer continues to grow in popularity in the U.S., especially among younger generations, football still refers almost exclusively to American football, and the distinction remains necessary to avoid confusion between the two sports. Global influence and the changing use of soccer. With the rise of soccer's popularity in the U.S., through major tournaments like the FIFA World Cup and the increasing success of Major League Soccer, MLS, more Americans are becoming aware of the global use of football to refer to the sport. Many Americans who follow international soccer leagues and players are familiar with the term football as it's used globally. However, for most people in the U.S., particularly those more familiar with the NFL and college football, soccer remains the everyday term for the sport. Other countries using soccer. Interestingly, the U.S. isn't the only country that uses the term soccer. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand also use the word to distinguish between their respective forms of football, such as Canadian football, Australian rules football, and rugby. This shows that the linguistic difference isn't purely an American phenomenon, but is found in other parts of the English-speaking world as well. Conclusion: the reason Americans call football soccer can be traced back to the sport's origins in Britain, where the term soccer was first coined as a shorthand for association football. As American football grew in popularity in the United States, soccer became the default term to avoid confusion with the homegrown sport. Despite soccer's increasing popularity in the U.S., the distinction remains, and soccer is still widely used to refer to the global game that much of the world calls football. This linguistic difference highlights the cultural and historical evolution of sports in the U.S. and Britain, and remains a fascinating quirk of the English language.